Hi, everybody. Jean Humbrecht with Humbrecht Law here, criminal and traffic defense attorney in Manassas, Virginia. Welcome to our first local business spotlight in December. We did miss the first week, but December's theme, it's actually National Get Your Business Plan Written Month. So going along with that theme, we have a bunch of local business spotlights and webinars focusing on different aspects of important things you need to know to start and run a successful business. So today we have a special guest, Brad McConnell with Northern Virginia Business Law. He is a business attorney in Prince William County, and I'm going to turn it over to Brad to tell everybody a little bit about what a business attorney does, and then we'll start getting into specifically what people need to know in terms of starting a business, the legal issues.
Well, thank you, Jean, and thank you for having me on your broadcast. I appreciate it. Yeah, so as Jean said, I am a business attorney, corporate attorney, call it what you will. And people often don't know what that means because, I mean, being a criminal defense lawyer, obviously, you can see it on television. Not a lot of business lawyers have dramatic TV shows about them. So the kind of stuff that I do, I represent businesses like from brand new startups all the way up to literally billion-dollar companies with two kinds of things. One is the transactions they do, and one of the is basically all their contracts. Any kind of contract other than like buying or selling a house. That's a real estate lawyer's job. But, contracts, whether it's setting up a new business, an operating agreement, a customer contract, an employment agreement, an agreement with for payroll, or an agreement for agreement for a commercial lease, or to buy some equipment, whatever it might, anything that's done with a contract, basically anything you're going to sign your name on that's not let's say it's not like real estate or not like a will or something like that. Those are the kind of things that I do for businesses. It's a wide range of kind of things.
Okay. Well, that actually leads me to a lot of questions, but in terms of starting a business, though, I know everybody has heard of corporation, partnership, limited liability, all that stuff. Is that something that you help people do? And could you maybe explain to those watching, the difference between those things and why you need to think about that when you start a business?
Absolutely. Yeah. So people know a little bit about, obviously people have heard of corporations and heard of limited liability companies, and they may have heard of sole proprietorships and partnerships and stuff like that. And, people tend to know a little bit, but I want to maybe demystify it a little bit because it's not, there are a lot of complications, but there's also maybe more simplicity than people might think. So basically if you're going to start a business, whether, you could just be, selling your artwork, or you do some little craft thing that you sell at a flea market, or maybe you mow people's lawns, or or you're an attorney, or whatever it might be. If you are doing business and you're making money for it, you have a business, right? So and if you do nothing else, you are what the law considers a sole proprietorship, which basically means you are doing business. Maybe you give yourself a name, but you are basically, it's just sort of an alter ego. You don't have it is just you doing work. Whatever money you make is part of your personal income, and you report on your income taxes. You might be able to get insurance for that, for the businessy kind of stuff you're doing, but you are what they call a sole proprietorship. The great thing about a sole proprietorship is you don't have to do anything. You just are a sole proprietorship, basically. The downside is you don't get any of the legal protections, which is why people set up things like limited liability companies and corporations and the like. And you can, even as a sole proprietorship, you can even have employees and stuff like that, but it's also harder if you want to work with other people, as partners. There's no way to basically have partners and take investments and stuff like that as a sole proprietorship. So, which is why, it's the liability and the sort of the ability to structure your business and grow your business. The reasons why people tend to move away from the sole proprietorship at, fairly early on. And because it's so easy to do some of these things, there's no real reason not to. So then basically the two kinds of entities that most people would set up are either a corporation, and there's what they call C corporations and S corporations. I'll talk a little bit about those, or limited liability companies. And limited liability companies are a relatively new, they basically only came into prominence in the 80s and 90s. They came out of the world of partnership law, and I'm not going to go deep into partnership law, but basically LLCs are a way of having a group of people can, come together. You file a short agreement with the state, and then you will now have liability protection. And you can be a single person. One of the things that I recommend for new businesses, if it's just you running a business, you can set up what they call a single member LLC, which is very simple to do. There's very little overhead, and you can gain some of those protections that that Microsoft has from being a huge company. So,
well, when you say protections and liability, can you explain to people what exactly that means? I mean, like what when you start a business, what do you need to be protected from,
sure.
and what can you be liable for that this whole process can protect you from?
Right. Well, absolutely. It's an excellent question, and people sort of like, well, what is the liability protection? So, if you are doing something, if you're doing something in the name of your business, you're doing consulting services, you are mowing someone's lawn, whatever it might be, you're selling someone a product. If someone is injured by that, if the damage is done, you are potentially liable to somebody, either by contract or in a lawsuit or something like that. And someone could sue you for that. If you are just a sole proprietorship, it's just you. They are basically suing you in your own name. And if they were to get a judgment against you, or if there was, you were to owe them, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, whatever amount of money, that's your personal obligation. I mean, you might have to declare personal bankruptcy or whatever it is if it's too much and you can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
If with an LLC or a corporation, as long as you've been created properly and are running it properly, theoretically you can limit it to, someone could sue you and take your business away, but that's it. You wouldn't be personally liable for anything above the value of the business. Now that could still be, that's still bad, but at least it's not, it's not unlimited in your personal liability. Now there's also insurance and stuff like that. I don't want to go too deep down that, but so that's one of the main, so basically it's the obligations of the company. Now, that being said, if you have a brand new company and you're going to sign a lease for some office space, or you want to get a bank loan or something like that, for the most part, you're going to have to personally guarantee those obligations. And that's where the liability protection only can protect you so far. If you were to sign a lease, for instance, just in the name of your business, and the business went under, you can essentially walk away from it. But if you have a personal guarantee, now that becomes your own personal obligation. So there's ways that the other side is going to want to have protections because they understand how liability protection works. So that, a bank's not just going to lend a brand new company a whole bunch of money that you could just walk away from. So, but right. But that's the big issue is protecting your personal assets.
Okay, so if you're a sole proprietorship, then your personal assets are not protected. But if you incorporate in any way, then that does give you different layers.
It starts to give you a layer of protection, exactly. And now I would also recommend, depending on what you're doing, you may want to get insurance because, and sometimes, especially if you're in a business that involves, contracting with other parties, they might insist that you have insurance because they also understand the fact that if you are doing something that could potentially damage someone or injure someone, if you have no insurance and you injure somebody and you can say, well, I can just walk away because my business is, it's just not much there. And there's no assets where they can get my computer and my, and my desk chair or something like that. So they may insist that you have insurance just so there is something there to back up the obligations, the obligations that you may have, that someone may have, the right to sue you or something like that. So that's why those kind of all, it's a complicated way that things sort of go hand in hand, acknowledging the fact that you have liability protection, but then people want to have some protection. So what are they? Is it a personal guarantee? Is it insurance? Is it some combination of that?
Got it. Okay. So could you tell us a little bit about the different types of ways that businesses can incorporate? I know that there are partnerships, corporations. Right. We already talked about sole proprietorship, limited liability, professional limited liability, which is what I am.
As am I, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about, the differences? I'm not going into, a 3-hour seminar, but just basically what the differences are.
Which I could, and then no one.
I know you can. That's
it's like, yes, because we've talked many times before, and So trying to keep it as simple as possible. As I said, the two main kind of things you have are corporations and limited liability companies. For the most part, you can do a lot of the same things with both. The advantage, and partnerships are also another thing that exist, but they've quite frankly fallen into disfavor in part because most of the things you could do with a partnership, and there were like things called limited partnerships and general partnerships, most of those things you can now do with a limited liability company, and also have the advantage of getting the liability protection that a partnership doesn't have. So the basics are, whatever a corporation and an LLC gives you that liability protection that we talked about, and is now a thing that would sign contracts, that has its own bank account, has its own tax ID numbers and stuff like that. Now the differences come into sort of how it's managed. With a corporation, which is the classic entity, you have a corporation is owned by its shareholders. It can be one single shareholder, or it can be hundreds or thousands of shareholders, and you can wind up being publicly traded on the NASDAQ. A corporation is owned by the shareholders, and it's generally managed by the board of directors will make fundamental decisions, and the officers will make sort of day-to-day decisions, presidents, vice presidents, those kind of things. So you have that sort of two-tiered system. I mean, you've got the shareholders, then you have the management by the board, and they're fairly formulaic in the way things are run. If you can have a one-person corporation in most states, and you could be your own board of directors and all of the officer positions, and you can run it that way. The main negative of a standard corporation is because it's its own entity, it has to pay taxes. So you have that dreaded double taxation problem. Now, what's the way to get around that? There's what's called an S corporation, and most people have heard of an S corporation. It's basically you get to, as long as you meet certain requirements, the IRS will ignore the corporation for the purposes of paying taxes. So the taxes, basically, the profits flow straight through to the shareholders. Now you have to do certain things with how people get paid, and that's why you really want to work with, especially if you're an S corporation, you want to work with a good accountant who knows how to deal with these things, because you can't just let all the profits go through. If you're running your own business, you have to pay a certain amount of it as income, and you have issues with income tax versus self-employment tax. It can get complicated from an accounting point of view. So there's the corporation, where you have shareholders and a board of directors and officers. The LLC, on the other hand, is, as I think I alluded to before, it comes out of the world of partnership. It is basically owned by the members. So that's instead of partners, the members are technically the sort of the equivalent of the shareholders. Now it can be managed basically in a lot of different ways. It can be managed basically like a partnership where, everyone, we've got three partners together, they all get one vote and majority rules, or it can be done based on percentage ownership. Maybe one partner, one member owns 80% and the other two own 10%. So they get to make all the decisions, but the nice thing about LLCs is you have a lot of flexibility. You can also have it managed by one person who basically has authority on most issues. Mm-hmm. The nice thing is you have a lot of flexibility in how you structure it. The downside is all that flexibility means you actually have to create the operating agreement to figure out how you're going to manage it. How are decisions going to get made? What happens if things go well? What happens if there's three of you and one of you you can't stand them, or you got to get them out. They're not carrying their load. How do you deal with those things? And that becomes one of those issues that you need to try to decide, preferably early on, because the LLCs they are very, very flexible, but it means you basically have to fill in all the gaps on how you want to run the business, so that there is more to be done at the front end.
Okay, so when you talk about operating agreements and preparing for all of those contingencies, can you tell us what exactly an operating agreement
Sure.
is, and why is it necessary in the very beginning? Or is that something that you can do later?
I would say it's a good question. I would say yes, it's necessary, but yes, you can do it later. So here's the thing: that an LLC, if you are already a sole proprietorship and it's just you can become a single member LLC right away. You just make a filing, and you basically are your own business. And you should have an operating agreement even for a single member LLC, but it doesn't really matter that much, because, as I say, the operating agreement is basically the document it's basically an agreement between the members, the owners of the business, as to how they're going to manage the business, how you're going to allocate profits and losses, how you're going to do distributions of money, how you're going to, what do you vote on, who has authority, what, if you want to sell the business, you need special authority. There's all kinds of things that go into the sort of the nitty gritty of managing and owning the business. If you have a single member LLC, quite frankly, it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, if you've got an operating agreement that you got somewhere off the internet, it's probably fine, because it's not, it does, because you're making decisions with yourself. It's when you need someone who does what I do is when you add a second person, because that's where, and this is when your question about, well, should you do it up front or should you do it later? I have dealt with people who've owned businesses for a couple of years, never got around to doing an operating agreement. That's not fatal. We just needed to get it done. But ideally, these are the kind of things you do up front, because it's much easier to negotiate in good faith when people are in that sort of honeymoon phase, right? Or not even the honeymoon phase, it's like the dating phase, where it's like, we're all excited about this business. We all want to be fair to each other. We're all trying to be reasonable. Agreeing on what percentage you own, or who has veto rights, or, if things go wrong, how do we get rid of somebody? It's a lot easier when nobody is the person on the outside, right? If you haven't made those decisions and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I might get booted out of this company now for something I've done. I may be much more willing to fight and argue and maybe sue somebody, as opposed to, if we agree to this in the abstract, it's a lot easier to do. There's no actual money involved. There's no one is about to get kicked out of the company. Nobody's like fighting over, well, I should have had 27%, not 25%, because it's all imaginary stuff, right? It's all something in the future. So it's much easier in general. You can't make all these decisions up front, because then your operating agreement would be 300 pages long and nobody's going to want to pay for that or do that. But the extent you can make major decisions early on when you are starting the business, it's usually wind up with a better result.
Now, there are probably a lot of people when they're in the phase of starting the business that say, I don't need to worry about that right now. We don't have any money. X, Y, and Z is more important than this right now. I don't want to pay a lawyer, blah, 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 all that stuff. What would you say to them? And the reason I say that is from the experience of starting a business, which I'm sure
right.
You think about all these things. What do I absolutely have to do right now? What can wait?
Right.
Is this is the reason why I want to start with the legal issues.
Right.
Is this something that, people need to absolutely have to think about and decide on in the beginning, more so than anything else?
And I am, as you point out, I am very sensitive to these issues, because I am a sole proprietor. I mean, not a sole proprietor literally, but I am a one-man shop here. So before I pay for any services, add something else, whether it's, an e-fax or a billing system or whatever it is, it's money out of my pocket. If it's not adding value to me, I don't want to do it. And maybe I'll do it, someday in the future when I have, but I am very cautious about that. So I try to respect all my clients coming in, because, it's sometimes you just don't want, you don't want to have to pay for, the platinum version of something that you may never need. So it is an excellent question. So the answer is, do you need to do all this stuff? Some of it you don't. And when people don't need and don't want to pay for something, what I try to help my clients with is try to prioritize what you need to do. I mean, you presumably want to set up an entity, an LLC or a corporation, pretty much upfront to the extent you can, because you want to start running it, get that protection, and establish the name for the business, right? And establish getting paid and having insurance and stuff like that in that business. And if you have a partnership, actually build that into the start, because the problem is, when things start getting complicated, is if these things start to grow and all of a sudden you have now I have a value in a business that isn't set up. Do I have tax implications? I said, well, I promised. One of the problems that sort of comes up to me is hey, last year I promised this guy I was working with that I was going to make him a partner in the business. We never got around to it, and I really want to do it now. Can we make that effective as of last year? And that can become a problem, because it's well, no, you didn't do it last year. And now, as far as the IRS is concerned, that didn't happen, and we can't fix that. And we can't make something, I can't get someone stock at last year's value necessarily, because it didn't happen then. Maybe then that doesn't mean that something you can agree, but there are certain things where, we agreed to something in February. We just didn't get around to putting it on paper until December, maybe. That kind of thing happens all the time. But if there's something if there was a filing that needed to get done, or something that triggered, you can't fix those things. I don't want to get too deep, but there are things like, for instance, if you're trying to get someone stock, and you want to give what sometimes people like to do, if you start a corporation, you want to give people stock, but if they leave the company, you want to get that stock back, right? So they can't just be an ex-employee with stock. So what people will often do is give people what they call restricted stock, which allows the company to buy it back. But there are tax implications of setting up restrictions that if you don't deal with those in the first 30 days from when you give them the stock, you can't really fix that problem. So it can become an ongoing problem. So that's one of these things where at the very least you want to know, am I going to do things that are going to trigger problems for the future? Like ownership, anything that triggers any kind of IRS or regulatory kind of situation, you want to get done right away. You want to get your insurance done right away. That's not my area, but you want to make sure. And quite frankly, your customer contracts. If you're going to have a regular customer contract, having that done up front where you understand what it is and you get your customers signing your agreement, investing a couple hours in a lawyer to help you set something up could save you down the line when you're signing other people's contracts instead. Yeah. So yeah, some of the stuff, an operating agreement, if you can scrounge up a little bit of money to pay for a couple hours of legal work, it's generally worth having that conversation up front. If you can't, then fine. As soon as you can, then try to prioritize that. Hopefully before things, go sideways, because that's when once they go sideways, then they start to get expensive. So
right. And that's a lot of the reason why lawyers get involved in things, because things went sideways.
Right. Well, and another example is employment agreements. To the extent that you want to restrict someone, that they have some kind of non-compete or they have some kind of, non-solicit agreement. There's all kinds of things. Maybe you want to, and then maybe there's severance, and there's all kinds of things you can put into an employment agreement. It's not necessarily a guarantee of continued employment, but these are the terms. For the most part, for those to be fully enforceable, you want those signed at the time that someone comes on as an employee. Trying to impose restrictions on employees after they've already been with with your company for a while, those can become unenforceable just because it's what they consider a lack of consideration. So it's like those are the kind of things that if you're going to be bringing on employees, you want to have those kind of legal issues dealt with up front. Make those decisions, get that agreement in place so that it's enforceable and people understand. And once again, it's the same issue of, hey, you want to come work for me, here are the terms I'm asking you to agree to, as opposed to, hey, you've been working here 6 months, I want you to now sign away some more rights. And it's like, well, why would I do that? I don't want to do that. That doesn't seem fair or reasonable. So that's another one of those areas where, getting an employment agreement in place early on can be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I just wanted to point out that when Brad says lack of consideration is basically bargain for exchange, meaning I go to work for somebody, you tell me, this is what I expect of you, and then this is what you're going to get. And then I say, great, I'm going to quit my job, I'm going to come work for you. And then 6 months later, you tell me, okay, well, we're not really going to do this, and we need you to do this. That's not what I agreed to. So that's kind of a violation of the contract. Is that a simple way to?
Well, and it brings up a very good point. A contract doesn't have to be in writing. I mean, there are certain situations where a contract does have to be in writing, including like for sale of land and stuff like that. The statute of frauds. And we're not going to go into the statute of frauds.
Everybody's going to get bored. No one's going to watch anymore.
Right. And it's like, oh my God, this turned into like some law 101 nonsense. But the important issue is just because it's not in writing doesn't necessarily mean it's not a contract. You may have a contract that you have an agreed for exchange, and there is consideration and your meeting of the minds and all that kind of fun stuff. Having the writing is important because it helps people understand what you've agreed to. So it becomes an issue of, this is what I signed this, we wrote this down. That's what we've agreed to, as opposed to people saying, well, no, I think we agreed to this. No, I think we agreed to that. I mean, that can still be a contract, even if the question becomes what the contract was for. The writing is a better version of it because it's in writing. So that's why, part of why it's like, you may have had a contract that you already established back in March. You just haven't written it down yet. So part of that writing can be just having it in writing is useful in terms of both sides understanding the expectations for what they think they're supposed to do. And which is why the contracts are important from a liability point of view, and people are going to sue each other. But the other thing that I think maybe even more important is that the two sides come together and try to decide, well, what are my expectations? What do I expect I'm going to do, and what do I expect you're going to do? What are your deliverables? What am I paying you for? How do I get out of this contract if I don't like it? Do I get my money back under certain circumstances? So these are the kind of things that having them in writing can help actually make people settle into the contract. So like 6 months from now, it's like, oh wait, well, I did agree to that. So even though I don't really like that, I did agree to that. It was part of the deal. So I'm going to keep going, as opposed to, it's like, I'm going to see if I can get out of this contract because like, I don't like so having those decisions made and expectations being managed, or I thought, when they were telling me this, I thought they were going to give me, 5 hours of work a week, but now it's only 3, but it's like, well, no, because you misunderstood something. But having those expectations in writing, I think is a very valuable part of the exercise. So whether or not it's something you're ever going to sue on, just that it sets expectations and can make people happier. Ultimately.
Right. And yet you mentioned something about, terminating somebody, which actually led me to something I didn't even think about before we started talking about this. There are issues that you could plan and do all the research in the world and not think about some of these things until after you've already started a business. So if you have somebody working for you, I'm no expert in this. All I do is criminal law, but I do know that, there are certain reasons why, obviously we all know this, you cannot terminate somebody. Also, that applies. My understanding is it applies only to businesses that are certain sizes and after a certain number of days. I don't want to get into all that and say anything incorrect, but what I'm getting at is the importance of having this stuff outlined in a contract, so that you don't get sued for, wrongful termination for some reason. Is that something people need to think about?
I think it's important. I think it's useful to have that kind of stuff. And I mean, it is generally useful. And I'm not a labor lawyer, but I deal with the employment contracts, right? So, and it is generally valuable to have policies, right? It's generally valuable to have agreements where people, so it's like, I mean, for the most part, employees are going to be what they call at-will employees, that you can terminate somebody for any reason or no reason. And usually even an employment contract will say that.
Is that just in Virginia?
Sorry?
Is that just in Virginia?
In general, most places, contracts, you're an at-will employee. But here's the thing. I mean, your contract might say, I'm guaranteeing you work for 3 years or something like that. But for the most part, unless you are a NFL player or something like that, you don't get like guarantee. I mean, you might. I mean, there are certain like highly paid executives that may get guaranteed employment, that get severance if it's terminated or something like that. But in general, even if you have an employment agreement, it's usually going to say it's at will. But then the question becomes, I mean, there's a couple issues. One is like, well, if I get terminated, am I being terminated for cause, which might give me certain rights or lack of rights, or am I just being terminated because they feel like it? And then I might be entitled to severance or something like that in that situation if it's in my employment agreement, or I might be entitled to get more of, if I got stock or something, I might be entitled to keep more of it. But here's the thing: just because you're an at-will employee and you can be fired for no reason doesn't mean you can be fired for an unlawful reason. So that's where you start getting these areas where it's like, I can theoretically fire you because I don't like the fact that you always wear a blue shirt on Thursday. But I can't. But if I'm firing someone based on things like, on race and religion and gender and stuff like that, that's when I'm going to get in trouble, because that's unlawful, right? So it's like, I don't want to get too much into like employment law issues, but in general, the employment agreement doesn't guarantee continued employment, but it can often govern, what kind of things would be cause for termination, and being terminated for cause, as they might give you less rights, right? So that that it's you can be terminated, like, and the agreement might lay out, it's like very instantly if you do one of these 5 things, and now you're kind of laying out a roadmap for don't do those 5 things. Now the other issue becomes, and once again we're getting into like employment issues, but if you have policies, if you have agreements, that's great. That's better than not having them. But if you have them and then don't follow them, that can almost be worse, because now you can potentially open yourself up to sort of accusations of discriminatory practice. If it's like, well, I kind of let the men slide. You know what? They mess up with these things, and like, but I play golf with them and I like them. But every time a woman screws up, they tend to get fired. I'm making absurd, somewhat examples, but those are the kind of things where people wind up in trouble because, there is either an intent or accidental, they're acting in a discriminatory fashion in an unlawful way. So
Mhm.
that's an area that's a whole nother, seminar on those kind of things. But
Yeah, yeah, and we won't get into the details about that, but I think just the crux of what you were saying is that it is important to talk to an attorney at the very least, or look into these issues before they become issues, and know what you potentially could be liable for. Um, and something that I thought of as we were discussing this, in most people who start a business start very lean, don't have a lot of funds, and you think it's never going to grow. I'm never going to make any money.
right,
But then it snowballs, and then you're so busy, you are panicking, trying to do all these things that you didn't have money to do before, or you put on the back burner because you couldn't afford it, or whatever, based on your priorities.
right.
And then you might be so busy that you need to hire somebody, and you don't have a lot of time, to be going back and forth with this. And I'm kind of just, I'm not being very eloquent right now, but you're so busy that you are
Right.
into this decision.
This
So
is not a hypothetical. This is, I have dealt with this
yes.
hypothetical dozens, hundreds of times where exactly, especially when, I deal with a lot of sort of family owned small businesses that wound up growing. And you know what? They never got around to having their annual board of directors meeting. And, they don't have resolutions that appointed officers, and, the shareholders never appointed directors. Cause why would they do that? It's just like, the husband and wife own the business, and like the kids ran the business. They never bothered with those corporate niceties. And for the most part, who cares? But then sometimes, somewhere down the line, someone's looking to, they're trying to get investors, they're trying to sell the business. And all of a sudden, as part of, the buyer says, all right, I'm going to do what they call due diligence. They're going to look under the hood, and they want to look at, and one of the things they're going to look at is all their corporate documentation, and making sure all their contracts are properly authorized, and making sure, because they're buying the business, they're buying, what are the assets? And it's not just the desks and the, the chairs and the computers. It's the future revenues from contracts, and making sure that, the business has been run properly, so that, that someone can't basically sort of unwind the transaction or accuse them of not having the authority to enter these agreements. And so those are the kind of things that if they didn't get done along the way, and if you set up a good process, if you set up a process where, every time we sign a major contract, I've got a board consent that we just sign it, and boom, it goes into the corporate minute book. That takes 5 minutes. But when it's, if you're trying to recreate something, I'm literally working with a company, I'm trying to recreate stuff, for a decade worth of stuff. And it's hard. I'm sort of going through and okay, this happened in, 2011. So I need to put, and having to sort of recreate those stories and try to go through to authorize and ratify and all that kind of stuff. It's just, and it takes time. It's more expensive. And quite frankly, it's quite obvious to someone who looks at the company to go, well, they didn't do their corporate stuff right. Did they do other stuff right? Were they cutting corners other places? So is it going to matter? A lot of times, no, but sometimes it will. And, sometimes it's like, it's a bank lending, it's someone investing, it's whatever it is. It's some outside, something that triggers people looking under the hood to see if you have done these kind of things. Sometimes it's a lawsuit, right? And saying, well, it's like, well, no, we're not going to give you that protection because you didn't run this business properly. You didn't authorize, the board didn't, authorize the officers. So those officers had no authority to do something. And then therefore they weren't doing it in the role of the company. They were doing it in their own personal right. So we're going to sue you personally. These are the kinds of arguments that get made because the corporate niceties weren't followed. So corporations and LLCs are great for protecting you from some liability. But as I said about other things, if you don't do the routine stuff, sometimes that can come back to bite you. So just getting in a good habit, because it becomes efficient, right? So you don't have to worry about it. You just do it. You do it right every time. Things just move along. You spend a little bit of money, every now and then, as opposed to trying to do a big catch up thing. And then you're having to spend a lot of time, as you say, you're busy trying to run your business. Oh, and by the way, you're also trying to help the lawyer fix all this stuff that you didn't get around to doing 5 years ago. And you're going through old files and old file drawers and trying to find stuff, and you don't have time for that. And then it just becomes a very frustrating experience. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the first thing that I did was supposed to be figure out how I was going to incorporate, which by the way is a lot simpler. And Brad, you can expound upon this if you want to. A lot simpler than people think. You pay
Yes.
but at the time I did it, it was a $50 fee. I fill out one sheet of paper. I had my friend that worked at a bank help me, just
Right.
wanted to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Scanned it, sent my money, and that was it. But before I
Right.
did that, I had to come up with what my business name was. And then I thought, well, how's this going to look on a website and all that stuff? So I don't want to get in all that, but you have to think about all these things in the beginning, because when you incorporate, you need to have, and when I say incorporate, I mean like decide how, what terms of what kind of liability I wanted for my
Right.
business.
Well, and you bring up a good point also. I mean, one of the first decisions in getting a name, you know, you want to make sure that, and this is the kind of thing it's hard to fix later, right? Because if you start a business with a certain name that you like and you market yourself, or you market yourself through networking and people like you and you get repeat business, and it turns out, 6 months later, 2 years later, 5 years later, you get big enough, or you get on someone's radar and they're like, wait, that's my name and this is confusing. And all of a sudden you get a cease and desist letter.
Mhm.
And now all of that time and effort you built in building the equity of your name, of your business name, could now go out the window because you didn't look into that to start with. So just because you can file with the Commonwealth of Virginia a name that is distinguishable doesn't mean that someone might not have be able to sue you for trademark infringement or something like that. So there are other issues about name, and then having getting the domain name, and all of those are important decisions too.
Mhm.
And you can't necessarily fix those. They're not necessarily legal issues per se, but it's something you need to worry about. So,
And then if you don't think about it in the beginning and do want to go back and change it, yes, some of these things you can change, but then
right,
you have to change everything else. So
right, yeah,
if I change my mind and I want my business to be Manassas Criminal Defense, right?
right.
I change my URL, and I want to change the way I'm incorporated. I got it. I mean, it's a lot of work.
Changing the name of your business, on file with the Commonwealth of Virginia, that's simple, right? But the fact that if people can't find you,
Right.
because they're like,
changing.
yeah, it's like Humbrecht law, then it's like, well, that doesn't exist anymore. I wonder what happened to her, because they don't know how to find you anymore. That's the bigger problem, is that you've lost that name recognition equity, so that they don't know how to find you anymore. So making that decision proper is important.
And I think I would just say, based on my experience, a lot of people they think it's not going to apply to me. I'm not going to get this big. I'm not going to make all this money. It's not going to, I'm just struggling to stay afloat. I'm starting with nothing. I don't need to worry about. I think a lot of people think about that, but then don't. Like, for example, intellectual property, which you just mentioned, trademarking and making sure that nobody else is doing business under your name, because you could be sued. And even though you think you have a unique name, you never know, because if you are successful and are making money, somebody might want to try to take advantage of that, and then sue you. And people think that people might think, oh, that'll never happen. Well, it does happen. And that's why we're talking about this. That's why there's intellectual property lawyers, which is something maybe we can have another, and my audience can have another spotlight on later this month. But yeah, the point is, there's just a lot to think about in the beginning, and these legal, all these things are legal aspects and issues, which, people really need to think about and at least be aware of before, making decisions.
Right. And quite, just to sort of end on the thought of, I am perfectly fine if people want to go to a legal Zoom and just, create a single person LLC and follow that's fine. Go ahead and do that. That's better than doing nothing. I think it's probably worth their while to, if a lawyer, to talk to them and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and talk about that planning ahead. Because if it's like, well, if I'm just running a services business and I might bring on a couple of partners, then a single member LLC is probably a great way to start. But if I'm eventually thinking, I'm going to need to get some investors, and I'm going to need, I'm going to grow and this, that, and the other thing, then it's like, well, that might not be the right structure for you. It might be worth starting with a corporation, because, of these 7 reasons. So making that decision up front. And can you change between an LLC and a corporation? Sure, you can. It's not that hard to do. There are some complications from an accounting and point of view, and but it can be done. But not having to do it is usually better than having to do it later. So that's one of those sort of fundamental decisions that you make. And one of, before I didn't touch on one of those things you also, it's hard to fix later. People bringing on employees or people having 1099 contractors. Those are decisions that you want to make carefully, because if you mischaracterize your employees, you can wind up with huge tax penalties that can be problematic. You can't just sort of like, oops, sorry, I'll fix that now. It's like, well, yeah, you'll fix that now, but you'll also pay those tax penalties for mischaracterizing your employees / contractors that you should have, like, and because a lot of people will try to, like, people like, well, I'd rather just be a contractor. I don't want to be, I don't want a W-2. I just want to take all the money. And that's maybe great. And you may both want that, but it may not be technically legal under the IRS rules, in which case that could, and that's often a conversation you can have with your accountant too. It's not necessarily a lawyer contract, but it's one of those sort of fundamental things you should think about early on in that process.
And in my experience, when you talk to an accountant, they will talk about a lot of the same things we talked about, but there's a certain point where they say, you're going to have to ask a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. Right. So I guess unless there's anything else you want to add about the legal documents and legal issues, what would you suggest how would you suggest that people start? Should they start by talking with a lawyer? Should they start talking an accountant? Should they kind of do it all at the same time so that you're asking the accountant things and the accountant might say, well, ask a lawyer? That should you be talking to everybody, intellectual property all at once? Where should people start?
I think, I'll tell you, I get a lot of referrals from accountants because they have people come starting their business and, they'll ask, hey, do you have a lawyer? If you don't, why don't you talk to Brad? And I'll have people come to me with their new business. And I was like, well, do you have an accountant that you're working with and they're more likely to have an accountant than the people going to the accountants that are to have lawyers, but sometimes they don't, or sometimes they don't have one. They have one who did their personal taxes, but they don't really know the business side that well, or the small business side that well. I feel like those two kind of need to go hand in hand, early on, because there's, if you're setting up an LLC, if it's a 2-person LLC, it's like, are you doing an S corp election? How are you electing to be taxed? These are some of the decisions that you're going to make all together. So those two kind of should happen, if not simultaneously, sort of hand in hand. The intellectual property side of things, at some point you may need an intellectual property lawyer to deal with stuff. There's, and we're not going to go too far down this. A lot of intellectual property, especially for a new business, is just going to be like trade secrets, right? So the key is to not tell people, and the people you have to tell stuff about, make sure they're signing agreements that they'll keep it confidential. A lot of like copyrights and trademarks and stuff like that are protected under common law. It might be worth getting, doing filings, in which case you're going to want to get an intellectual property lawyer involved, depending on how important it is to your business. And if your business is a technology, is a key technology, there may be all kinds of stuff that you need to do patent filings and all that kind of stuff, because that's important, because that's the key to your business. Not every business needs that. Not every business needs to do trademark filings, but some might. So that might be a very early stage decision, depending on the nature of your business. But that's a little more like, it's not sort of a catch-all kind of thing. But accountants, lawyers, and quite frankly, they should be talking to someone about insurance usually pretty early on too, because that's going to be an important part of protecting themselves. So.
Now, if somebody came to you to talk about what they wanted to do in terms of starting a business, would you be able to advise them based on their particular situation, other professionals that they may want to talk to?
Oh, absolutely. I've been in practice for a little over 25 years now, and most of my clients don't have in-house counsel. Some of them do. So I kind of take on that role as sort of the ask me questions, and I may be able to answer them and do the work for you, or I may be able to help you find you people, whether it's other lawyers or other, people in other areas that you need help with, a grant proposal, or you need help with, you need patent filing, or you need help with, whatever it might be, you need an insurance person. I try to help put them in touch with those people to sort of be that kind of clearinghouse. And I can listen to their questions, like, you know what? Yes, you need A, B, or C, or, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but let me put you in touch with someone who can answer that question. And I talk to lots of people with new businesses, and sometimes it's like, you know what? You're great. You don't need me. come back in 6 months or a year when you're ready to do A, B, or C. And, I may not hear back from them for months and months and months, which is fine because, at least I know they're on the right track. And whereas like, no, you need to do this thing now and maybe I'll never hear from them again. Or maybe, as they start to grow, they'll have more needs. But, trying to prioritize which are those things that you should do now that you may or may not have done. And then sometimes it's just like, yeah, hey, you need to talk to, this is an insurance question or this is an accounting question. Let's get you in touch with a good accountant who can help you with this issue. And then, when you have specific needs of my skills, then I'll help you with that as well. But I don't like to pretend that I know things that I don't know because it's not worth my time or the client's money to pay me to learn about it because it's like, it's not my I've been doing this stuff for 25 years. I'm good at this. I'm not good at I couldn't do what you're doing. I literally have no idea how to do criminal law. I would not know. I don't even know the names of all the different documents that you file. So it would be embarrassing for me to even talk about it. So,
well, and I would advise, I've actually been contacted by people who wanted to start businesses and for various other legal issues and wanted me to help them. And I said, you're really better off going to somebody that does this every day. Right. So, we're all good at our own wheelhouse. And I will tell everybody that I forgot to mention in the beginning. I have personal experience, professional experience working with Brad. He has helped me with a couple of things. And also I've referred him to some friends of mine for, business related issues, some people starting businesses. I think all of them actually were starting businesses and they've all given rave reviews. So
thank you.
So Brad, I do appreciate all of your work and he knows what he's talking about, which is why he's on the live because I couldn't come on here and just tell you everybody how to do it because I'm not qualified. Brad is.
Well, and that's the thing, because people, my experience is like, oh, you're a lawyer. My ex-husband isn't paying his child support. I'm like, can't help, don't know anything. I learned a little bit in family law 27 years ago, but other than that, I don't know anything. So I don't, but because the average non-lawyer is like, well, you're a lawyer, you must know all this stuff. And it's just like, nope, I know a lot about like this much, but there's a lot of stuff to know and I don't know it. So.
And then you tell people that and they still say, well, it's just this and it should be easy.
Yeah. It's like,
and I said, you know what, maybe it is. And I hope it is, but please just call Brad or please just call my other friend who does family.
It's like, you can also Google it because I'll know a little bit more because I went to law school, but I don't know these. There's so much I don't know. And I will be the first to admit I don't know it. And try to help. There are often times where I'll try to help. It's like, I'm not the right person to do this. I might be able to do it, but it's not, you wouldn't be getting the value out of it. So let me find someone who is really in that area, especially when you start getting into litigation and stuff like that. I'm more than happy to, help people out if they're having a dispute and try to, resolve that dispute. But, if people are going to start suing each other, that's when it's like, you need a litigator and we'll help transition you to that person. And help tell the story and explain what I think is, the issues under the contract, for instance. But that's what lawyers do on television. They are in court, and I don't do that. So, and that'll never be something that I do. So,
well, I think that for business law, the reason why you want to talk to a lawyer is to avoid having to ever go to court, yes, right? Yeah. I come in a different way. When I come into the picture, you've already got some stuff going on and you have to go to court. But when you talk to a business lawyer, the whole purpose is to avoid having to ever go to court.
Right. And if you do wind up having to go to court, you'll be in the better, you'll be on the stronger side because that's what you want to be. Because as I tell people, a contract, even the best contract in the world, doesn't guarantee you won't get sued, but it does put you in a much stronger position if the contract is in your favor and you are complying with it. And that is just, it's a better place to be. You have a much stronger negotiating position. You're much more likely to win were it come to that. So better to be on the right side of a contract than not. So exactly.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to leave us with before we go? We talked about a lot of things, which are also important. We could, like you said, talk for a couple more hours. Anything else that you want to just say that we haven't gotten to, or to sum up?
No, I think I don't remember if I mentioned, did we talk about like different states and stuff? The one last little thing that sometimes people ask about, it's like, well, should I set up like a Delaware corporation? Because I hear all these things about a Delaware, and the truth is, for most businesses, setting up a business locally is the most efficient and the cheapest thing to do. Because if you set up a business out of state, you also have to basically have to do all the filings out of state plus all the same filings in state, and you're gonna have to pay somebody else to be what's called a registered agent in out of state. So it becomes sort of a double expense. And unless you are, looking to be a venture-backed company, and you're soliciting, investors from the West Coast and wherever, you don't need to be a Delaware corporation. It's rarely the right answer. I mean, being a local LLC or corporation is probably the best choice for 98.3% of the businesses who I talk to. So,
Okay.
not to say that the others aren't important, but they generally know why they're choosing to be a Delaware corporation.
Right.
So that's just one little. But there's a lot of decisions, but it doesn't have to be that hard. I mean, each individual person. And the one last little thing also. There's a lot of people who are in the government contracting space in this area, and especially people who are, I've dealt with people who are setting up like service disabled service disabled veteran owned businesses and the like. And there are special rules that apply to those kind of businesses, especially if you want to get into some of these programs. And those are another one of those areas where if you mess it up, it may be hard to fix, right? So you want to set up those businesses properly if you are trying to get into any of those programs. So that's worth doing right. And there's resources out there other than just lawyers, but you want to make sure you do that right as well. So.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like if you're starting a business, the smartest thing to do would be to, at the very least, consult with a business attorney that can give you some guidance on the things that, based on your situation, you should prioritize, and things that you really should do, things you can wait on. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I've spoken to many person who's called me. We've talked for, 15, 20 minutes. It's like, you know what? You don't need me right now. You can just go and do something online. I'm not going to add anything. I mean, you're welcome to pay me to do the same things that you could do, but you don't need my services. And then I'm more than happy to say, you know what, but come back if you do. And I'm not trying to blow people off. I'm just trying to say, it's like, listen, if I'm not going to add value to what you have, I don't want to, I'm happy to build those relationships. But I don't need to, I'd rather people ask. It's like, hey, do I need, is this something that you can help me with? And sometimes it's like, nope, do it yourself. You're fine. Or, let's do this small thing and maybe it'll turn into something else. But yes, talking to a business lawyer is usually a good idea if you're setting up a new business. Do you have to do it? No. But at the very least, I would say, please talk to an accountant, because they might be able to help at least on some of the basic stuff, and hopefully know when they're getting in too deep and can at least address the issues to say, now you need to talk to a business lawyer. So, so we exist. We are out there. You just have to find us. So.
Yes. Well, Brad, I'm actually going to ask you to put, a link to your website or any social media in the comments here. You can do that after we end the broadcast, just so people know where to find you. Thank you very much for your time, and you gave us a lot of information. And I mean, I'm just thinking of 20 other topics we could do based on all of this. But I guess the main point, which is what I wanted to get across with doing this first, is that legal issues you got to think about. Talk to somebody who knows what they're doing, not your criminal defense or family law attorney. Find a business attorney. And they'll be able to tell you, because even if you're an attorney, like, which I was, I'm not an expert on starting and running a business. I wasn't, and I'm still not. So, I need help. I need help from people too. So that's kind of the main thing I wanted to get across, that there's legal issues that need to be thought about. And if you choose not to, go down a certain path, at least what. At
least you're making a choice. I'd rather people, even if you're not going to take my advice, do it knowingly, right? Do it. It's like, you know what? I'm willing to take this risk. I'm not going to spend this money. I'm not going to do this, as opposed to, if I'd only known, if I'd known I was going to have to, spend $500, I would have done that. It would have been well worth the effort, whatever it might be, $100, whatever it might be, just to do it. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Brad, so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
All 30 minutes plus the 23 extra, right? So.
Yeah, we said 30, but anybody who
everyone who's met me knows that, like, yeah, that's not a thing that's going to happen. So.
and who knows me and says that I'm a great interviewer. I don't think that that's true at all. I think that I just keep thinking of questions and like to talk. I don't know. But Brad,
I think that's what makes you a good interviewer, quite frankly. So
oh,
it's
well, good.
there we go.
So yeah, Brad and I said this was going to be 30 minutes, and here we are at yeah, almost an hour. So on that note, thank you, Brad. Put in any information in the comments, which will still be available.
I will. And I've actually been I sort of this is triggering some need to sort of finish up a couple articles I will be posting that'll come out on my website and on through Facebook and the like. So if you follow, you can get those on your feed. Just about some of these same issues that we talked about today, but in a little more detail and in writing. So you can look into some of that stuff. I've been committed to doing this, and I have them in like 95% done. So I need to sort of start finishing them up and getting them out and published. So you can look for some of those in the coming weeks. So
awesome. I'll be sharing those too on my page.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean. I appreciate it very much as always. So,
all right. Well, I will talk to you soon, Brad. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.